Now Amplify LTC is coming as a live in-person conference. We'll have top industry speakers leading one-of-a-kind classes, many of whom you've heard on this podcast already. You can check out the website at AmplifyLTC.com. And we are so excited at the chance to interact with you in person in Nashville this May. Welcome, everybody, to Amplify Long-Term Care podcast. This is your host, Frances Nahas, and I'm here today with Miriam Cho. I'm super excited to have her on. We've talked a little bit in the past about other things, but our topic today, we're going to talk about employee management and employee engagement and how we improve that in the pharmacy. So I'm really excited to have a great conversation. Miriam, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me again. I'm excited too.
Awesome. Can you remind listeners, give us a little bit about your background, kind of how you got into pharmacy?
Sure. So I've been with Macrex of Illinois for a little over 9 years now. So Macrex started as a startup back in 2014. And fast forward now, we service over 120 nursing facilities in the tri-state area. I think we service a little bit over 21,000 lives just from Illinois. We also have a sister location in Indiana. Their MedScript pharmacy, long-term care pharmacy. When we acquired that business, they service about 2,000 lives, and then that was in 2021. And currently today, they service a little over 7,500 lives in Michigan, Indiana, and then a small part of Kentucky. And then we've been very busy. So last June, we did launch our third location in around St. Louis, Missouri, and that pharmacy was also a startup. So we began to onboard residents at that location in June. And fast forward to today, we have a little bit over 3,500 lives at that pharmacy, about 50 employees there as well. So yes, we have a lot of things going on. It's very busy, and we have a lot of employees and management that we continue to grow across all three organizations.
Awesome. And how did you get into pharmacy?
I got into pharmacy. My mom was a pharmacist. My family has a very strong healthcare background. It was one of those things that really just fit. For me, personality-wise, it's something that really fit for me just from schooling until then. I actually made a shift randomly from education to healthcare. And that was something that I realized I was really passionate about. Right. So then I started in retail and kind of made my mark there. And then as I was growing, long-term care came in kind of as a surprise. It wasn't something that I was actively looking for. I think today, long-term care is a lot more recognized and understood as a niche of pharmacy. But if we go back 10, even 15 years, I really do firmly believe it was something that really there wasn't a lot of awareness about.
Nobody talked about it. Yeah.
Nobody knew about it. It's a completely different world. Clinically, I think we hear so much about retail, which is a very important sector of pharmacy, but the long-term care space and understanding that our population is aging is something that is extremely important now, even more so, even post-COVID. So it was just random on a whim. I had a phone call, you network, people. I had a phone call, and it was a pharmacist that used to be a floater for me in the retail space. And she was like, hey, we could really use somebody like you at this new startup that I moved to. And that's what happened. And the rest is kind of history.
Awesome. Well, you guys have grown pretty dramatically and grown where, you start up a new pharmacy. So you start with probably a handful of employees and have to continue to grow. How do you think about managing that growth and onboarding new employees? Like, what are some of the big things you guys do?
I think there's a lot of things that you try to control, and then there's a lot that you kind of do wing based off personality. I think building teams is a lot like what I relate to, like a puzzle. I really like puzzles, right? Yeah. And I think when you look at a puzzle piece on its own, it doesn't make sense.
Right.
But when you start to fit pieces and connect pieces together, ultimately you begin to build a really nice image. And I think that's where, even from a startup, no matter what phase that you are, acquisition phase, like in Indiana, where we had pieces, and then it was kind of rearranging of pieces and making the picture look a little bit different versus the opportunity. And it was really fun and exciting, but also challenging, right? Building a brand new core team with the Missouri operation over the past year and a half. We started dispensing in end of June of that last year, but really the building of the team took almost 2 years.
So patience is probably an important element there, right?
Yeah, hugely. Patience. I think being able to get to know different personalities.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I think this is even when you interview anybody for any job. When somebody walks in, you may not get an A+ candidate that walks through the door, but can you really identify, understand, and learn that individual? And then if you're able to capitalize on the strengths that they do have and then build the other areas where that's teachable, then I feel like that's what allows us to be as successful as we are.
What were some of the differences between sort of acquiring a pharmacy and trying to bring them kind of into the fold and into the way that you guys run business versus starting one from scratch?
If I had to weigh between the two,
Yeah.
very honestly, the acquisition was a lot more challenging. When you have a scenario where, anytime you're walking into a pharmacy or into any business for that matter, and they know that the change is coming, I feel like there's three groups of people. There's the people who are just out, they don't want to do with it. Then you have the people who are in, and then you have the people that are sitting on the fence. And I think that's the initial rollout, the communication and that driving and focus on culture and company culture as you're getting to know the individuals in the organization is really going to be your make it or break it. We knew for sure going into the acquisition of MedScript that there was going to be some turnover. When you have change of ownership, when you have a change of leadership for that matter, there is a change that happens down the organization. So understanding that, I think we were able to navigate those pieces, but having gaps when you're also fully running and, truly still taking care of patients at the end of the day. I mean, balancing that was definitely challenging, definitely more challenging than the startup. I think the other piece, though, is work ethic and understanding processes and procedures. To change process and procedure for individuals who understand it is very different than building one and teaching a brand new core team from the ground up. So I think that training, we spent a lot of time with our support services team and the Missouri new startup team to make sure that as you have people from all different backgrounds in long-term care and some not in long-term care, making sure that a lot of their processes aligned with, what we consider our day-to-day policy and procedure.
Right. It is a theme. It's really interesting. I was actually talking with one of my colleagues this morning about this of change management is hard. It doesn't matter what industry you're in, right? It's really hard. But there's almost a fear of it, I feel like, in a lot of pharmacies where we go out and talk to. So any kind of change, there's this fear of like, oh, God, I don't know what to do with that. I don't want to have to tell my employees that, right? Regardless of what that change is. How did you guys approach that, right? Because when you acquire a pharmacy, you open a new one, you're changing by definition, right? You have to confront it. And so how do you think about how you approach that change management, or what lessons would you share with people about it?
I think it's a lot of personal time. There's many different leadership styles and there are many different management styles. And what we found the most effective was that personal, direct relationship building. And that takes time. And not every organization can afford that amount of time, depending on what their structure looks like or what they're facing from a growth perspective. Right. Finding Aaron, who's our COO now for that location, was one of the most integral pieces that once you find that you've place the right individual at the head of the organization, then they can begin to carry the flag with you. So, when you're carrying the message alone, walking into the acquisition versus then building individuals who are so truly in your team, and then, strengthening that foundation, then I believe that every other individual coming over to make that cohesive team, it's a lot faster and it gets a lot stronger. And that's where you gain that momentum.
Yeah. You mentioned process. How do you think about how important that is to building an organization, how you get employees bought into the processes that you want?
You read my mind, because that buy-in work is huge, right? Yeah. And buy-in happens not just at an acquisition, not just at a startup, because you have to go through all those different pain, all that pain that we know that startups have. But even on a day-to-day basis, buy-in for just change in general, not just change in leadership. Getting buy-in has a lot to do. It has a lot to drive with making sure that the team's really believe what you're saying, right? I mean,
Right.
that's what drives your buy-in, and understanding that there is a very clearly defined mission statement and your core values. And then, understanding that in every conversation or even every conflict that you have, somehow if you're able to bring it back to what your core mission is and or relate it back to a value that you understand, I think the more that our teams hear that from anybody in leadership, and the day that you have it where you have your employees, any employee throughout the organization, regardless of level, speaking towards those, I feel like that's when you have affirmation that you truly have buy-in on what you're trying to get done.
Right. Right. So it's that ladder almost of having kind of really clear vision, having authenticity and the belief in it throughout all your communication, then connecting that back to the change or the process or the thing that you're trying to actually go accomplish.
And it's hard. It's hard because you're intermingling that constant pulse into the hustle and bustle of every day. And making sure that we are stopping to remember to do so sometimes is what's the most important. I think planning out a year in advance is so important. It's as important as retrospectively looking at the past year so that you can plan a year in advance. What we found very successful in our more long-standing pharmacies are that if we build a plan and a projection for manager development and employee engagement for the next year, then you don't lose track of that in the hustle and bustle of your everyday.
Yeah. Yeah. That's such an interesting thing. And there's kind of two elements of that stand out to me. One is, I think we oftentimes think about, well, I've got to plan financially. I've got to do the budgets. I've got to do this. I know, but making sure that parallel to that is an actual plan for employees and how you think about their development or paths that they're on, and having that at a macro company level and also at sort of an individual level, right? So it's personalized.
Agree. I think while we're building that, we also think through how can we make sure we're always providing opportunities for growth? Again, you need to make sure that you're addressing your new employees who don't know the company and making sure they're beginning to adopt and learn those values. And then also making sure that the employees that you do have understand that there is growth potential, growth opportunity, and they understand that where they are, there's places to grow, things to aspire to grow into, and additional things to learn. I think the second people feel capitated in any environment, I think that's when negativity starts to brood.
Right. So how do you guys do that? What are some of the tools that you use that other folks might be able to learn from?
I think one of the bigger things that we implemented as Illinois grew in size, we have over 240 employees, whether they're remote or on site. Prior to COVID and everybody having this hybrid schedule, it was a lot easier. Now getting that engagement and doing that, being able to execute that is a lot more challenging. One of the things that I remember doing very clearly was creating salary bands in your department. So where that, hey, when we're looking to hire, when we're looking to onboard individuals, you may begin at, an A, but then you have the ability to grow based off of these set benchmarks above, not just in your salary and how much that you're making, but also skill sets that you're learning, opportunities to thrive. And, obviously turnover is something that's very difficult. Staffing has been a huge challenge. I know not just from us, but from talking to anybody in healthcare.
Right.
Staffing has been difficult, but, there are so many times where you have so much satisfaction from, and just so much happiness that comes from an individual who came to work in your organization. They grew through the ranks, and then they went on to do something that was completely something they never thought of. And I think, again, is it difficult if they do leave? Absolutely. Obviously, that's a challenge that we all have to navigate. But on the flip side to that, I think that appreciation and that networking even down the road, there's never been a time where any of our managers have thought, oh, that was a terrible thing that happened that we let them go. Does that make sense? It's almost like you're so happy that you were able to have an environment where they could grow and thrive, and then potentially do something for their personal lives that was even bigger than they ever imagined they could be.
It's that when you're truly invested in that individual, right? That can be a wonderful thing, and you can be kind of proud and excited for them, while also knowing, okay, I've got to build the things over here that allow that to happen and allow us to run a business and have more people who come in and can go on that path, right?
It's the double-edged sword. It's scary.
Right.
But at the same time, it is definitely very rewarding.
Yeah. And it helps you retain employees for longer kind of during that time frame, right? If they know they have that belief, I can build skills that are going to help me develop in my career, wherever that is.
Then going back to buy-in too,
Yeah.
like making sure that everybody understands the vision and the reason behind why. It's hard. There's
Yeah.
a lot of times where no matter how we try to message, whether it's by email or like a stand-up or something like that, we always try to make everybody understand the why behind so that they can see the vision, right?
Yeah.
It's much easier for someone to support the vision you have if they understand the pieces that make up the vision.
Right.
But there's sometimes where there's topics where maybe we can't share every detail,
Right.
or, you can't speak about those things. And I think that's where we still work through to try to make sure that we send as clear of a message as possible, but it is a learning, it's still a learning curve.
Right. There is always that balance of kind of being transparent when you can and almost sort of being transparent where you can't. Like we can't kind of be transparent. And acquisition's a great example, right? If you just, you're going through one, like legally there's things you can't talk about, right?
Or why we're here, right? Or, that type of thing. We had probably a good 6 to 7 months of post-acquisition where there was turnover, and the turnover was hard. But once you hit that core team, that really is that foundational element, I think you still will always have turnover. It's a natural course of any business. But at the end of the day, I feel like that solid foundation has allowed us to then focus on a startup in another state, right? Because we understand that we have the pieces in place, the process in place, and then that communication level that's necessary.
Right. So you mentioned the sort of the hybrid work model, the remote versus in office. How are you all navigating that? What are some of the lessons folks can take about how to build a really positive culture and invest in employees while navigating a hybrid environment?
So in absolute transparency, that was done in the moment. So what happened was, COVID hit.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden, in December of 2018, in 2018 alone, just in Illinois, we doubled in size.
Wow.
We added close to 10,000 lives just in that year alone. Then you fast forward the next year, and during that next year, we really were focused on physical growth for physical plant in the pharmacy. We had put our automation in. We expanded our physical footprint because we were just too big. And then we had built an entire new area with office cubicles and everything to accommodate all the additional staff. And then 2 months after our grand opening, it was COVID.
The pandemic hit, right?
Like a desert. And so what was the focus at that time? Getting equipment to set individuals up to do so, walking through and navigating all those pieces. And so I really don't think, very honestly, it wasn't until probably 5 to 6 months into COVID, that's only when we began to roll out employee engagement activities and communications. So what that looked like was we had a few different things that we did from week to week, and a lot of it was video based. So all of our managers from their remote locations, they would be sending messages out for their teams. And we would take time throughout the entire day for a few weeks in a row to then begin to broadcast those either by email, by link, out to the teams themselves. Then we moved from the management team sending those messages of encouragement to actual physically emailing electronically, right? Germ-free.
Right.
Different communications or different things that they wanted to teams that they once worked side by side with, but maybe hadn't seen in a while. Continuing to share photo reels of all of our employees, new employees, as you're sending out blasts of, hey, this is our, these are our new employees, say welcome. 50% of the employees couldn't even meet them, see them, say hi, our typical, what we would do for onboarding, and that changed too. We did a lot of care packages out to our teams. So our team's on site with not just like hazard pay and those types of things, just to make sure they understood, but also how do you make that relevant to our employees that are remote and they're off site. So care packages, I think people really appreciated. And then really just doing whatever that we could to engage our remote employees. I think a lot of the departments went down to just even more departmental, where they would have these Zoom parties, and things like that, or just happy hour, but via Zoom, those types of things. but it definitely was a challenge.
Yeah. How are you guys handling it today? And what of those things that sort of you developed at the time have you carried forward?
The bi-weekly, so I'm sorry, bi-monthly. I always say that wrong.
Right. I'm like, which one is it?
So yeah, twice a month.
Yeah.
The management teams still do their team meetings, and they hybrid it very well for the individuals who are physically on site versus not. Anything that we do internally for our teams on site always gets reciprocated and also provided for the teams that are remote. And then we also make sure that in specific intervals throughout the year, we're paying for and we're funding for our some of our core team members that are remote or in other states are coming on site for different special activities and things like that. So how can we continue to engage them? We also have programs like Mac Cares that we developed because we have, as a healthcare organization, how else do we give back? So Mac Cares was kind of the brainchild of, after acquiring MedScript, what else can we do in the community and how else can we promote that? So we've done Mac Cares events and kind of volunteer events in locations where we know we have a lot of remote employee residents and then have those there. Yeah. And then, of course, we have to blast them all so everybody can see.
Right.
And maintain that mindset. And then the individuals who can't participate, they can at least see what other great things that, their colleagues are up to and how they're also giving back.
Right. That's great. It's that balance of sort of finding ways to engage where they are kind of in their own communities and also where the offices are in their communities and finding those points of connection and sharing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So bringing that little bit of personal to work, if you will, and recognizing the individual.
Yeah. I think that's definitely very important.
Great. How do you think about like social media and the impacts of social media, both positive and negative, in the workplace?
That's such a loaded question,
right.
But it is. I think that there are pros and cons to like there is to everything. Right. Definitely some of the cons. I think this perception of my workplace is perfect and it's paradise right. and I have no stress at work, like that image that some people portray, I think it's challenging. And it's challenging because then, I think that we understand on a day-to-day basis, I think if we everybody should enjoy what they do, but at the end of the day, let's be serious. It is
right.
work,
It
right?
is work, right.
So again, do you want to enjoy what you're doing? Do you want to enjoy majority of your day? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, there are things that we have to do and obligations that we have to meet on a day-to-day basis. So I think that mindset of comparing is something that social media really makes it difficult on a management level. I think what's good about it is the ability to have a platform to also show what positive things that we're doing as a company. And if we're talking about comparing, sometimes it's really nice to be able to at least have an area to put that out there where I know that people are looking outside the organization so that then they have an interest to potentially be part of your organization right. and what that looks like.
Right. What should we be asking you when we think about sort of employee engagement and how you create a positive work environment? Like, what should I ask that I haven't?
I think there's a difference between newer employees and then your longstanding employees. And we talked a lot about salary bands. I think the other things too are, licensure assistance, opportunities for education and continuing education. I think conferences make a very big difference, and the ability for your teams to be able to participate in those, to see something that's outside of the organization. I think what has been really helpful and very thankful for is, there's a lot of additional stress that comes with having 3 different sites that are just sisters, not really, they're related, but not one operation per se, but allowing them opportunities across the same role, but in a sister location. So it's very safe to sit and have discussions about what they can do better, what they're seeing that the other one potentially is not, and making those recommendations. I think sometimes sitting in your role alone, I wouldn't say alone, but sitting in your role and then knowing that there's somebody that you can bounce things off of that really handles the same things on a day-to-day basis, right. You don't feel intimidated by that. Right. And I think that you also don't feel afraid to just openly be able to speak your mind. I think a lot of times in organizations, I think you have individuals who may just hoard information, right? And they don't want to tell anybody because, that's how I make sure that I have my job. And this allows them to have a pretty open dialogue and a pretty open discussion, because if I'm doing something that's going to improve my pharmacy and they can improve theirs, but that you're separate but equal, I think that helps with that building of that camaraderie too.
Right. That's great. So training and then finding those connection points where people can actually sort of learn from each other in a safe environment, right?
Yeah. In 2020, we did roll out a program in Illinois, and we've done it in Indiana once now. But it's something that we coined MIT, and it sounds corny, but it really does make sense. It's more of a manager and training program. So how do you continue to feed? How do you continue to build additional layers in the organization so that it's not such a straight line down or not too far along where it's too much for one individual? And I think we found a lot of value in that. I feel like that has allowed us, even in a larger number of employee setting, to really get to know individuals who maybe necessarily aren't your managers yet, but it allows you to learn their personality and their communication style before, structuring your teams correctly. I mean, if we go back to that puzzle thing, it helps you to kind of take a look, right? But also grow and make decisions based off of what we have.
Right. It is always an interesting thing where it's sometimes people are thrust into management roles or into kind of different positions without necessarily having the training or their managers having a lot of visibility into their skill sets there. It's just like, well, you do this really well, try this, right? So it's to your point, a great opportunity to sort of understand where they have skills and strengths and where you can build skills and strengths before you put them into a new position.
Agree. One thing that comes to mind, and I don't know how this is affiliated, but I think a lot that we talk about more recently is meaningful meetings. I think there are a lot of meetings in life. And, I think sometimes managers will get into a situation where they feel like, hey, if my calendar is full, I'm doing a great job.
Right. Because I feel busy.
They correlated to. Right. And then you have other employees that are like, another meeting, right? And what's the point of this meeting? Or that, you see all those memes that say this could have been an email.
Right, exactly.
Being able to drive meaningful meetings, I think, ensures that you're always engaging, even your managers. Just because you have a manager title doesn't mean you're fully engaged. Just because you have a manager title doesn't mean that you know everything either, right? And I think making sure that we're driving that piece has been challenging, but definitely, I think, well received. Making sure that every meeting has a time frame, right? You have a potential agenda if we can. Most of the time we try, but definitely walking away with deliverables. I think everybody, no matter what level in management that you are in a company, I think everybody wants to know what their goals are, and they also want to know that they're doing a good job.
Right. So that's a fantastic one. I love that. Meaningful meetings. Just make sure every meeting is a meaningful meeting. What are other fun tools like that? Or how do you think about how you build that into a culture in the organization, right? That I think individually anyone can try to do that, but to make it kind of a cultural habit where everybody does it, what are some of the things you do?
Well, I'm not sure how we got this done, but there's Kurt and I have this mindset. If you have a question, don't shoot an email, just pick up the phone and ask, right? I think a lot right now with texting and emailing and, being remote and not being remote, it is sometimes way more effective just to pick up that phone. And I think our managers all understand that they can pick up the phone at any time and call somebody else. Does that make sense? They don't have to ask me, or they don't have to ask somebody else's manager. I think that is definitely something that's strong. One other thing that we have rolled out maybe about a year ago was off of this. I was on a random flight somewhere, and I read this article about monkeys. It's in Harvard Business Review, and it was this really, really old article, and I didn't realize how old it was. But what it emphasized to me even more so is that people don't change. And it really helped us to define across each organization and have our teams really do self-reflection on the level of an employee that you are. And really what separates an excellent manager and an excellent employee versus maybe one that's good is the one that actually just reports back in every scenario to make sure that there's full circle communication, right? I think if there's ever a scenario where you're someone you report to or someone who reports to you that is left in an open-ended question, or they don't really know how something got resolved, I think that's where potentially there's bad feelings, there's some negativity that can brew. And I think there's potential, like, if there are scenarios where if I don't know how we got from point A to point B and I don't ask, then you just assume how you got there. And by assuming how you got there, it definitely can lead to problems down the road.
Right. I think it's a great framing. It's a fantastic lens to put on customers also. And I love that, it's like we'll talk about closed loop communication, but I love the idea of thinking through, like, how many open-ended questions are out there, right? Like, how many open-ended questions have you left an employee with, or have you left a customer with in a particular interaction? And how do you decrease that? How do you close that out for them? So it's a great lens.
Yeah. I think trust between managers is important too. I think in teams who can give each other the benefit of the doubt, that maybe I didn't get a chance to call you today or tell you, or maybe I'm going to tell you tomorrow, or I think there are times where I think everybody can say they're walking through the pharmacy and then someone's like, well, did you hear this is happening, or now we're doing this? In the situations where there's not continuous reiteration that we have to trust each other and that nobody in the team is trying to do anything detrimental, that's the difference between an employee walking away thinking nobody tells me anything versus, oh, there's probably a reason for that, right? I think that's that clear difference.
Yeah, I always go through, and I think it's the assume good intentions kind of thing. So it's like, what if they had good intentions and this happened? Like, what then, versus just automatically assuming it was bad. But I do sometimes think it's also just like, assume benign intentions, right? Like, they were walking through the pharmacy and they just got busy and they did this and they did this, right? And it's like, it actually, there was never a negative intention. What does that mean? Right. And I do think that's kind of that, the more you trust folks, the easier that is. But the more you do that, the easier it is to trust and build those relationships.
I agree. It's hard to say this part too, but there are times where there are sore thumbs and bad situations that happen. Yeah. It's life. We're dealing with humans at the end of the day. And so being able to really nip those and grab those as fast as possible and bring them back to full resolution is so important. I can't tell you how many times when myself personally, it's just things happen and it is hectic. I'm a mom. I have 3 kids. I have, my work life and home life, and there's 3 different pharmacies. There's a lot going on. But I think there are times where, in hindsight, if I had taken the time to just provide resolution instead of letting something fester, whether it's on a management level or even on an employee level, you can never say sorry later by addressing it in the moment versus letting something go. And, I think the longer you let it go, potentially the bigger the barrier becomes and the harder the bridge is to make. And so that is definitely difficult. It's happened in the past. And it's one of those things that you always think to yourself, like, should have, would have, could have. But I mean, that could be very detrimental to any organization if you're not having hard conversations sometimes. Yeah.
It's the preventative care of, like, relationships, right? The things you've got to sort of do as you go and stay on top of, or they're just going to get, like, fester and get worse. Yeah. Yeah. Just address them right away.
Don't they say, like, if people who've had positive experiences, 1 out of 10 people will tell somebody that. But like 9 out of 10 people will advertise their negative experience all over the place. Right. And I think, taking those moments in. So we do a lot of engagement surveys. MedScript was in the top workplaces for 2023 in the state of Indiana.
Congratulations.
Well. Thank you. Things like that. But as we're doing that, do we celebrate the wins? Yes. But have we built a lot of quarterly values and a lot of quarterly focuses for our management team in Indiana for 2024 based off of areas we can see improvement? We absolutely do. So I think it's balancing, celebrating the wins, but definitely addressing those hard topics too of what we can do better.
And it's a classic, like, if you don't address it, it's just going to get worse, right? So at some point, like, you just got to take it on.
Yeah. I mean, we take it back to medical, right? You need to take your antibiotic. Otherwise, there's nothing really much you can do.
Right. Exactly. So what messages would you love to leave folks with, right, as they think about managing employees and managing change and creating, an organization that's really high performance and high engagement? What are the, if you take away nothing else, take away this?
That's a hard one. I know this is going to be an edited one.
I'll give you some of the themes that I've taken away because we've talked about so much, and so many of them really resonate with things I think we've tried to do, to varying degrees of success, right? But it's things you try to do. Setting a vision is just so it's the point of departure, right? It's so important, and making sure people understand that why. I love that as kind of a starting place. Thinking through, I joke where it's you have to tell people 10 different ways, 10 different times of how you communicate kind of over and over again. You talked about, I think, is really important, especially when you have people in different locations and some remote and some on site. Using the phone as the drive-by office communication. I think we forget sometimes in a world where we've got multiple offices, ooh, the phone is scary. And it's but if you were in the office, you'd just walk down the hall and ask, treat the phone the same way. So I love that idea as well. And making sure, I love the puzzle piece analogy, right? That at the end of the day, it's we have boxes on org charts, but everybody's a unique person, and making sure you understand sort of how they fit in the organization, and how you bring that little bit of personal to their development and the communication with them and acknowledging what's important are just kind of really great things to think about as we think about organizations. And trust. We talk about that a lot, right? Trust is just the root of it. When you've got it, things become really, really easy. And when you don't, they just get progressively harder.
Agree. I think what comes to mind for me is, when we think about the pharmacies globally, and this is a lot of discussions we have with our management teams, I think there have to be layers where everybody embodies your core vision, but the layers are kind of like this. You, at the way top of the head, at the tip of the mountain, those individuals have to be planning and seeing 5 to 6 years down the road. That's their job.
Yeah.
And that's how they have to continue to pull the vision, because they know they have a shared vision. Then underneath, the next level of managers that you have, they have to be able to look a year, maybe a year and a half in advance, meaning what's coming down the road and how they can continue to break down barriers and drive improvements and drive efficiencies. And then you have the individuals that need to look and see 6 months in advance to see potentially, and maintain that. And then you have the individuals that really are so critical at handling the day-to-day. And I think if you continue to move that direction, you have people that are paving the way years in advance. You have the ones that are knocking down barriers that are right in front. And then you have the ones that are really managing and handling and tackling your day-to-day challenges so that you can continue to move forward as a huge, huge operation. I think we consider ourselves, very quick to move and make change because that's what we really pride ourselves on. But if we think about it in a big picture as a huge moving like Titanic, I think all of those pieces are so integral in long-term success.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's if you miss any one of those pieces, suddenly it doesn't work, right?
Yeah, definitely. It's fun. It's fun. It's challenging. It's the most rewarding and the most stressful, all built in one.
Right.
But I think the biggest thing is that I don't regret it at all. And I really do absolutely adore and love all of our teams so much, just because at the end of the day, we have, and we're so thankful to have and have grown teams that are just so intelligent, successful, they communicate well, and they're just so driven. We just don't want to lose. And all of us understand that we just don't lose. And if you take that mindset, you're not going to lose, you don't lose.
Right. It's amazing how believing it makes it true. Right. In some cases.
What do they say? You win. Whatever you don't win is a lesson. Oh, I said it wrong, but something like that. All of the battles you don't win is just a lesson that you learned.
Yeah.
It's not a loss.
It's not a loss. Right. It's a lesson, and you bring it back around.
Yeah. It's fun.
Perfect.
I love it.
Awesome. Well, that is a fantastic message to land on. So thank you so much for being here. This was a lot of fun. I always enjoy chatting with you. Great. And thanks everybody for listening. Thanks for being with us today, everybody. This is our pharmacy podcast for long-term care. You can find us on YouTube, Spotify, or Apple Podcasts. Please subscribe and continue to listen for great conversations around long-term care and how to elevate your pharmacy.